the Astro has been this like preferred but also weirdly timed RNG job in Shadowbringers, especially in the raid scene. Or are these changes good for you, bad for you? What's your take on the changes with the Astro?
Overall, they're pretty good. The biggest issue, I was pretty harsh on the card system just because. So a lot of people like the RNG aspect of Astrologian, and that's fine. But the thing that made Astrologian okay was that they had way more opportunities to play around bad RNG, right? You not only had like multiple like 3-charge draw system or redraw system, enabling you to redraw 3 times in a row to get like your preferred seal. You also had sleeve draw, which was changed in 5.3, I believe, to be a guaranteed seal of your choice or for whatever you didn't have left, right? So that was like your fail-safe mechanic. They removed that and they removed your multiple redraws. So now you only get 1 redraw after every card, which is going to feel really bad, especially because currently Astrodyne is just not that strong when it comes to how much damage it provides to you. So like currently, like in regards to, this is like less important for like casual / midcore players, but for like the high end optimization crowd, you're going to. Oh no, I don't. Sorry, I didn't mean. I don't know if I said it wrong.
No, I get it.
You know what I mean, right? Like
yeah,
it's not worth. Gonna be really, really good for. We're not going to name names, but Chris.
No.
If you're a bad Astro, I have great news.
Yeah, like you don't like the thing is like a good card, a properly timed card is going to be more impactful than sacking a seal, right? Like it can be better to do like a 2 unique seal than a 3 unique seal just to get like a better raid DPS from your card, right? It's like that kind of stuff feels really awkward to think about and to kind of feel out and like proper play. So I kind of hope they just like the ideal scenario is they either change the redraw system or they give you sleeve draw back, or they make it to where redrawing gives you like a seal, guaranteed seal of your kind. Though that would kill the RNG aspects, I don't think they would do that just because like that's kind of like the flavor of the job, right? It's like Astrologian is the RNG healer for most people. But if they do that, I think it'd be really good. Overall, though, the healing toolkit's awesome. The playstyle is really good. Some people complain about the minor arcana stuff, how it's like RNG as well. You can get like a lord, you can get a lady. It doesn't really affect me as much. I don't really care about that kind of stuff. I think it's kind of unique. Will it be annoying when it comes to like week 1 progression where you pull like 10 ladies, you don't get 1 lord, so you just miss out like 2k potency or something? Maybe. But
I like
I think that happened to
because,
Mr. Happy on the tour.
Yeah,
he was trying to get footage of the wrong one.
Oh yeah,
and he said in the chat, and he's like, so pretty cool. I just pulled 10 in a row.
Nothing but ladies pulling. The I actually like that because I really didn't enjoy the Arcania change in Shadowbringers because I was just like it just didn't feel like significant or impactful. But now it's like, yeah, you get a damage ability or you get an AoE heal ability. Like it's like I actually kind of really appreciate that, even if it's flipping a coin, even if it is all ladies one day. I'd rather take that.
You bring up a good point because I forgot to mention this too, but now you have no option. So like you no longer have an option to sack a card when you don't want to use it for a seal, right? So now you're forced into just using it for like, even if you have 3 seals, let's say you're in a situation where you have 3 seals, you have 3 unique seals, but now you have to throw another card out before you use your Astrodyne. Now you're put in a position where you're forced into a 2 seal rotation because you cannot throw it out. You just cannot get rid of the card because you're not going to drop the card. Undraw is still really bad. You're never going to use undraw. Don't put it on your hotbar.
Yeah, I never have, but I was like, good lord, if I couldn't redraw and I'm just fishing, like would that make sense? I don't know.
It's a really weird situation. I hope they change the RNG aspect of the cards for sure, but we'll see.
What about you, Cole? Where are you at with the job?
With the Astra specifically, I need to mirror everything that was said. I also think, especially with Astrodyne, I'm actually going to pull it up here because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth here.
That's fine.
So Divination, I really love the change to that just being instant. Okay, there, Astrodyne. So specifically, it says that it increases damage dealt, so by you, as an Ast, and then healing potency by 5%. These numbers can always change, but as an Ast, your baseline damage is just not even in the same dimension as something like a DPS. Like even compared to like Scholar, White Mage, and the other healers, it's still so low, their personal DPS. So I'm not incredibly impressed by that. And it's just like what Momo was saying. It's just like you never want to undraw. You will sacrifice that seal because like putting a card onto DPS, they're going to make so much more work with that, or so much more raid DPS contribution with that than you getting Astrodyne. And so I do see myself being a little frustrated with Astrodyne. My first take of when I read that ability was it's like super cool. It's going to be amazing. It's just like it gives me more MP regen. It's going to be giving me a little bit more spell cast time. But that 5%, I was like, I'm not the biggest fan
What
of
would make
that.
that then become a fan of it, right? So we talk about numbers can change, and so we look at the Astrodyne ability. Like, what ends up making that impactful a buff for you?
So it's not going to be the healing potency because 5% increase, while I will take it, I'll absolutely take it. You can't rely on that because it's just like if you start relying on that for a particular mechanic where you're just like, okay, my co-healer is going to be using Indom as a scholar, then I'm going to need to say use Macrocosmos. And I know that those two, that ability is not going to change that. So the 5% healing is kind of, you can't depend on it. So it's kind of like, I have to kind of toss that benefit. But what would make that would be if it was like another damage buff for the party. Is that likely to happen? No, I don't count that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure how I'd take it with that. The first two effects, I will absolutely always take MP. I will absolutely always take reduced cast time because that in itself will boost the damage. And likewise, if it stacks with that, it does a bit more. But it's like still when we're looking at Fall Malefic, where is it here? It's doing 250 potency. I know that Scholar is doing 295 with Broil. Sage, I think, was quoted at. Sorry, I don't want to.
330.
Oh, 330. Yeah, which is like 250 versus 330. Like,
It's
that's a
significant,
huge
and
gap.
that's gonna like, especially like in those in longer fights, it's just gonna add up. I love that Sage was bringing a lot of damage options. I really
It's
actually
gonna
was
be
like,
so cool.
somebody was like, "Is it just like one button?" It's like, no, like at the end of the day, like it's gonna boil down to a couple of buttons because healers don't have a lot of options. But I feel like they're getting more and more options than they had in Shadowbringers. I felt like there was a massive homogenization of it. So I want to talk to you guys about that. When we had 3 healers, I think clearly I like the healing winners and losers, was discovered pretty quickly. What do you guys think about the layout of the healers going into it with all 4 and the targeting, barrier versus pure?
Should I go second or first? I
You
can
can go
go.
first unless you're troubleshooting, or I can give it over to Chris. We'll like
Sorry, my camera just.
All
Oh
right.
my god, sorry.
So I think the dichotomy between the healers is going to be pretty interesting because currently, I'm sure if you've seen like the high end runs, you actually see sometimes like a white mage and like a diurnal astro together, right?
Mm-hmm.
2 pure healers, because they're just really efficient at. Astra's really good at mitigating damage with like snapshotting CU and being able to apply barriers with neutral sect, which we could get into that as well, but
It's gone.
yeah. No, that's still there. The neutral sect's still there. They can still apply
Oh,
barriers.
sorry, neutral. I was like, I was thinking the other sect. I was like, okay.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Noct's gone. Yeah. But you actually might see a like a, I guess, the scholar barrier duo becoming like a real thing, depending on how the fight design is, I guess, or fight encounters are designed. And I think it's gonna be really interesting because like Scholar Sage, there's nothing in the toolkits outside of how like Noct and Noct shields and Galvanize can't stack. It's the same thing with Sage, and there's really nothing in their toolkit that implies that nothing else stacks. So if you can stack shields like that, because they both have some pretty beefy shields, so if you can stack, that's gonna make them really strong in farm scenarios or even potentially progression scenarios. If the fight design, jeez, I cannot speak English today, holy moly. If the encounter design welcomes it.
So, as a casual player, I really didn't like the tank homogenization going into Shadowbringers. I was pretty outspoken about not liking tank stance because it just felt like we were making them all very, very, very similar, and we were removing a lot of what made the role itself feel unique compared to something like melee DPS. We're basically melee DPS with mitigation instead of positionals. And so like I was really frustrated with tank stance being added because it takes that enmity and it just kicks it off. Having gone into like Savage and stuff, there's some weird stuff that happens with, tank stance and tank swaps, like when you're first learning to Savage tank. And so as a healer, like they said, hey, we're keeping these 3 and we're not going to label them as anything because we want to keep them unique. But what it ended up doing is it didn't end up doing that. Now they're all competing for being the exact same task. And so now it's just an optimization game where top end players say, hey, here's where we're at for farm. Here's where we're at for prog. and everything kind of gets slotted. Now we're in an incredibly balanced game, so this entire discussion comes from a point of like, compared to other MMOs, we should really just have no complaints whatsoever.
Play what you want, yeah.
But as 14 players, of course, you know, even though we're near the sun, it does lack a slight bit of perfection and always will, because your choice is either 100% homogenization or there will always be a theoretical best for a situation.
Exactly.
I think moving to 2 healers is really interesting. As I'm getting to know all the other jobs, one of the things I appreciate about the melee gear shenanigans that happens is that it gives melee a chance to have some different personalities take place. And so tanks, like at the end of the day, if we added another tank today, it has to have a 10-second invuln, it has to have a gap closer, it has to have a ranged attack, it has to have it has to have. Well, then you don't really have that much flexibility when you design a tank, because before you even decide what the theme is, we've already built out half of its hotbar, and healers were kind of headed that same direction. But now you immediately say, okay, it's either personality A or personality B. So when you pick a theme, you know, like Gundam Laser, for example, you have a chance. You have a chance to say, okay, is Gundam Laser better fit by theme A or theme B? And so you immediately build like a tiny bit of flexibility in, because there might be things within what eventually becomes a pure healer kit that doesn't have to exist in the barrier healer kit. So you end up with something like Sage, where you're like, oh, you have to put the direct heal in. Well, how do you direct heal with lasers? Oh, well, we just won't do as much emphasis on direct healing. We'll just call it a shield healer. So I really like it because I think it gives a chance for the healers to have like 2 different personalities. I am questioning what the meta is going to be, because we've seen the meta decide, you know, like for example, everybody's going to want to play Sage. Do scholars get slotted in Party Finder?
No. So it's funny bringing up the homogenization. Every healer actually has their strengths and weaknesses, even if they are somewhat homogenized, which I think is going to be really interesting. For example, Sage has very small radius heals. They don't have as many 20 yalms heals. They have Numa, which is really, really big, but that's their only like really big skill. All their other skills are 15 yalms, which may not sound big and like when we're talking about it, but because Scholar has a fairy which they can heal away from the party, which means for mechanics like Cole mentioned, the Thunder Cycle in E11, Scholar can handle that mechanic with ease, whereas Sage would have much a harder time trying to deal with that. They also have weaker shields. Sage can't apply strong of shields as Scholar can. The Scholar can not only can they deploy crit adloquiums with ease now with recitation and deploy now being 90 seconds each. They can also buff Adlo. Adlo buffing is more accessible because your creation prognosis is an AoE. That means if you want to buff that, you have to use AoE increasing abilities like Fey Illumination, Mantra, Asylum, things like that. Whereas Adloquium gets affected by those as well, but it also gets affected by single target things like Thrill of Battle, Nature's Men, Protraction. So like you can just continuously buff this Adloquium shield to monstrous potencies and just deploy like some half HP health bar shield to the party. But yeah, they have their strengths and weaknesses. Sage's biggest pro is that it can heal or it can shield while on the move, and heal technically while on the move, which is something Scholar can't really do. I mean, they can with like their instant cast, but like they can't GCD heal on the move without using swift cast. So they have their pros and cons. I think it's just going to be down to like whoever wants to play what in Party Finder. I don't think a healer is going to get slotted. I don't think the balance will ever get that bad again, you know?
What I'm personally excited about, though, because when it comes to the balance, is that with 3 and not like when the fact that they did go away more from like, oh, pure versus, barrier. Now that with Sage and Scholar and White Mage and Astro, like from a balancing perspective, actually I'm less worried about it at all, because they can look at White Mage versus Astro and just make whatever tuning changes they need in the pure category. And then in the shield healing category, they can make whatever balance changes they need between those two. So you're not looking at, okay, how do we do this? Because you want to keep that what makes the job unique, to the role itself. But then you also want to make sure that it's not like, oh yeah, clearly we do not absolutely take this job. And 14, like Chris said, it's like like it's we're flying too close to the sun. Like it's when there's nothing to complain about. What are we're gonna go find a little enemy, a little thorn to sit here and bark about. But I'm actually personally more excited by that change, in which that it feels like, hey, they're going to try to pair us up with either one of the pures, and one of the shields, and having those work together. Obviously, in raiding and having more pre-mades, that's going to be, I guess, where more any kind of meta forms over what works better for the party than anything else. And people usually take, oh, that particular party is using this build, that therefore it's the best. And it's like, well, maybe for you, the best, you're going to do better if you actually enjoy playing the job than anything else.
Exactly. Now, yeah.
Cole, did you want to weigh in on this homogenization topic? Don't worry about your camera.
Absolutely. And sorry about the camera, my god. Of course it'd have to blow up, right? Oh my god, I'm so sorry. But yeah, in terms of homogenization, I think that the healers are extremely diverse, and that's something that I am actually very happy with. I know that Sage versus Scholar, like their toolkits are very similar. It's just like you look at the Aetherflow system and then you look at the Adder's Gall. If I ever say Serpent Skull, that's because like I got the translation, so then I'm like, oh, it's got to be Serpent. Oops, I was wrong. But like those are incredibly similar systems. It's just like you look at Fey Blessing, that's literally Holism. You look at Fizzes, that's literally Whispering Dawn. You look at the Cardia system in general, and I think that while it could be very awesome to like think about like, oh, okay, you're like the DPS healer and you're getting this really big benefit from doing DPS. Well, the Scholar doesn't need to like DPS in order to get their fairy to proc healing. Like the fairy's going to be doing it no matter what. So the way I almost envision it, especially like when I'm looking about progging, especially when I'm looking to prog like Dragonsong War coming into Endwalker, I'm thinking I'm leaning more into Scholar because I know when I'm progging a fight, expecting myself to understand when and what I can get away with for DPS is a lot harder. So I'm looking at the Sage and I'm just like, this is going to be really, really great when you can like optimize and like look more into that kit. But I'm definitely thinking that the Scholar will be like far better in terms of just like the flexibility. So even comparing the two healers that are like the closest together, it's just like there are definitely points within them that I think are very different, especially when you even consider like the Sage gets only Toxicon, which they need to have the Eucrasian diagnosis shield break, so their single target shield break.
Mm-hmm.
That is their only ability to actually cast while moving. And while a 1.5 second cast time, don't get me wrong, like you get a ton of movement. I love that on Ast right now. That's one of the things that made me such a huge fan of Noctast. But when you're like doing wide sweeping movements, sometimes just the flexibility of Ruin 2 is just so invaluable. And so the Sage doesn't really have equivalent that is like free. So they need their 3 charges, stack it up, wait for a mechanic, then they go vroom. The Scholar doesn't really need to worry about that. But on the flip side, the Sage also gets the abilities Rizomata that gives them 1 stack of Adder's Gall, as well as Zoe, which is just going to like double the potency of healing of their next heal. So that's kind of like taking the one single recitation ability from the Scholar that would give you like a free Aether Flow that you'd probably blow on an Indom and then a crit, and cleaving it in 2. So even with the 2 healers, I'd say are the closest together, I'd say lots of differences, which makes me incredibly excited. And then Ast, my god, that is like the OGCD pumps out heals. Like it's just like when you're talking about like collective unconscious and then like all these other off GCD AoE heals, the white mages that I know are just like, you know what, I kind of want a bit more off GCD AoE healing too. And especially actually to that point, when I'm thinking about barrier healers versus pure healers, I know as a Scholar, I have been in the state that I call running out of gas, where it's just like there's no Aether Flow, there's no cooldowns, and
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of out to lunch. And that's when I'm like looking at my co-healer and I'm just like, help me please. And then like a white mage just boom. And so I think going into Endwalker, the healers have such a good, healthy spread. I'm very much excited for it.
So, based on kind of some of the optimization you guys are talking about, as somebody that's, I'll be taking those instant tank cues while everybody tries out Sage and Reaper. So, based on that, like as kind of a 2-part question, what is your go-to kind of healing partner setup? Right, what are you going in as, and who do you want with you going into P1S? P1S being the most it's the largest invitation to the community to try out Savage. It's usually tuned, the first Savage of an expansion is usually tuned intentionally to try to invite people to try out Savage for the first time. So like, what is your go-to there? And then on the other side of that, if you know somebody is just getting into healing for the first time, does that change that answer? Does that change what healer you think has kind of the lowest skill floor? Because they've already said in an interview that like they're aware that Sage and Reaper is going to kind of ask a lot of somebody that maybe is first stepping into that role.
It's funny you said that because I actually disagree. I think Sage is very beginner friendly. The only complicated system around Sage is your equation diagnosis or your equation system. But overall, it's very much like Y-Mage. It's very straightforward. It's very easy to understand the abilities. There's nothing like super like restrictive about it. Like for example, Scholar is very difficult. I still think it's probably going to be the most difficult healer to understand come Endwalker, just because you have so many components in its system that are fighting against each other. Like for example, you use Dissipation, you no longer have access to your fairy. You no longer have access to generating fairy gauge. You use Aetherflow on heals, you lose damage with ED. You use Seraph, you no longer can dissipate. You no longer have access to like Fey Blessing, even though you have like Constellation to kind of make up for it. Like there's this little system, and you can't Fey Union as well.
Right. Yeah.
So you have like these little systems like fighting against each other. You kind of have to understand as a scholar where everything needs to be used and how everything interacts with its own toolkit. Whereas like White Mage and Sage, you just kind of press a button and you're kind of like done, right? Now, are there some complexities on both White Mage and Sage? Of course, right? But they flow very well. They're not restrictive, and that's like the big thing that makes Scholar very difficult as a new player. Like so many people will come into my chat and be like, Scholar is really hard. Like, how can I do this? Where should I use X ability? Why can't I use my fairy during dissipation? So it's just like it's complicated because it's restrictive.
That's how I felt a lot about Summoner in Shadowbringers, because it's like, okay, like you have these skills that can only be used, but then you're always wanting to bring out your Bahamut and your Phoenix, and that's going to turn this off. So you got these windows that you got to slot these abilities in, so you get these stacks, so that way you can use these off these build like during this time, and then end up just feeling very like bouncing around. My only concern with Sage is literally I'm just going to have to put a lot of time with it on the controller to make sure that it's actually accessible and comfortable, and you're not like sitting here having to. Somebody asked, like, how do you move around and cast abilities on the D-pad when you're moving? It's like,
oh my God.
You have to like actively like mangle your hand to do so, and it's not recommended. That's why I always put like anything that can cast on the A, B, and X, Y buttons, or the the extended cross-hop bar, etc. But it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I hear you. And whenever we get a lot of those abilities that you want to use on the move, it's like, okay, that's definitely lower priority on up, down, left, right. For sure. So that's my only concern for Sage for new players, is that if they're like, I want to try healing now for the first time at level 70,